Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take. It is the day after Liberation Day, April 2nd. I'm not sure that day is going to stick. It was good not to do on April 1st, not only because it's April Fool's, but also because you had a couple of key elections in the U.S., in Florida and in Wisconsin. And Trump clearly wanted to go after that because he knew that these weren't going to be super popular. And yet, this is exactly what he was promising. He's been promising tariffs. He's been promising securing American borders, securing borders from people coming into the U.S. illegally, also securing U.S. borders from unfair trade practices. And that is precisely what we're seeing right now. Overnight, the United States is moving to having the highest tariffs against countries of any major economy in the world by a very long margin, and also the largest average trade tariff in over 100 years. This is a new era. It's a post-globalization era. It's a post-war era. It's kind of the equivalent of what the Brits did with Brexit, just on a global scale. Now, why these tariffs, and what's behind the percentages? Because Trump's been talking about reciprocal tariffs for a very long time, and yet these aren't reciprocal. There are no countries that have the percentage tariffs on the U.S. that the U.S. is now putting on them in terms of goods. So how did they do that? That's the extraordinary thing, is the calculation wasn't based on the tariffs that are imposed on U.S. goods. Rather, it was a look at the trade deficit that the U.S. runs against those countries, and taking the percentage of what the trade deficit is, and applying a tariff that would get you to parity. In other words, what reciprocal from Trump's perspective is whatever would actually bring that trade deficit into trade neutrality, and then just impose half of that, which makes no sense economically whatsoever. Why not? Well, first of all, because there are a lot of poor countries around the world that have trade deficits with the U.S. because they can't afford American goods, and the U.S. wants to buy commodities, for example, from those countries, or low-tech manufacturer like from Bangladesh. And are you angry because the Bengalis aren't capable of buying Teslas from the US, or buying smartphones? And the answer is, of course not. And that's all that's going to be is a tax. The US government will pick up revenue, and the Americans will have to pay more for inexpensive goods that the US isn't going to produce. Some cases, these are goods that the Americans not only wouldn't want to produce because the labor quality and cost is really, really low, and no one's going to do that work, especially when you're closing borders and taking illegals out of the population, but also because the U.S. economy couldn't produce them. I mean, your tropical fruits, I mean, some of them can be in the United States, but most of them need to come from other places. Coffee beans, I mean, all sorts of things that the Americans are just not going to be substitution effect producing, that now are just going to be higher costs for the United States, for average Americans. And then in places where the U.S. was not in deficit, then you're just throwing a 10% tariff against. Why? Is that about fair trade? No, that's just about the Americans wanting to ensure that there are tariffs on absolutely everyone. It reminds me of the January 6th conversation, where originally Trump was talking about, well, maybe we got to look more carefully at all the really violent types, and we're not going to want to give them amnesty, but there are a lot of people that were treated very badly, very unfairly, and so they should have amnesty, and they should be pardoned. And as the details and the debates on who should and shouldn't get a pardon came out, Trump got sick of the debate, got sick of the nuance, and said, I'm just giving it to everybody. And I think that's what happened with tariffs. There were debates going on with large numbers of advisors around Trump right until the last minute. And he just said, I'm just putting tariffs on everybody. And that's what's happened. And now there will be individual deals that will be cut with a bunch of countries to try to get out of that. But the reality is that the biggest trade partners of the United States, there's no quick fix, not with Europe, not with Mexico, not with Canada, not with China. And given that, we are clearly, not only out of a U.S. driven globalization era, that's been gone for some time now. Globalization has been moving apace, but the U.S. has not been driving it. The U.S. had been kind of standing on the sidelines and pushing their own industrial policy. But now you have the United States actively unwinding globalization. And the question will be, how effective will other countries be in playing defense, in hedging, and in bringing some production, more production to the United States? Because in the near term, you expect to see a lot of countries will try to limit the damage that's being done. And the U.S. economy is, of course, stronger and more powerful. So that will mean that a lot of countries won't immediately do reciprocal tariffs, but will try to cut deals with the Americans. A lot of companies will try to find ways to manufacture more in the U.S. That's near term. In the medium and long term, there will be hedging. There will be efforts to find ways to de-risk their economies from the United States, from the uncertainty, the volatility, the high costs. And sure, you'll want to produce things in the U.S. for U.S. consumers, but most things are not being consumed by Americans, and that is increasingly true around the world, and therefore you wouldn't want to produce most things in the U.S. in that environment. So you'll see more hedging of the Europeans towards other countries, including in some non-AI fields, towards China. And I think you'll see that in bigger ways in the global South, who already have their principal trade partners as China anyway. And then final point is, keep in mind that the Americans are not really good at being patient. And Trump has been talking the entire way, not one of the most patient people in the world, that look, yeah, they're going to be costs in the near term, and I don't care if the cost of cars go up, but long term this is good for Americans. And certainly near term there's going to be a significant economic hit, not just in the stock market, but also in U.S. GDP and also in inflation. And Americans, I suspect, are going to be pretty angry about that, because Americans are very short-term in orientation. It's the nature of free market capitalism, kleptocratic or not, in the U.S., and it's also the nature of the political system. So that's where we are. A lot to think about on the back of these unprecedented policy moves. And remember, it is a marathon, not a sprint. We are only a couple months in. Trump has 4 full years, and a lot is going to happen over the course of that administration. And I'll be here to talk to you about it. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you all real soon.